Welcome to Asshat Analysts, the debate game show where the points definitely matter and we take things way too seriously. My name is Josh Johnson, and I'm joined here with my roommates, Nathaniel Jackson.
Yo.
And Kyle Jennis.
Howdy.
Stay tuned to find out who truly is the king of pulling random facts and arguments right out of their ass.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Asshat Analysts. This week, we are joined by special guest, Mr. Tim Craig. Say hello to the people, Tim Craig.
Howdy ho.
Alrighty. So, this session is our Parlay episode. So, we have a topic. We're all going to openly debate it, and we're going to award points at the end, or maybe not, based on if someone changed our mind on the topic or if someone just made a small point, anything like that. So, Nathaniel, what is our topic today? I don't know why I called you Nathaniel.
I appreciate it because that's my name. So today's topic is what is one thing that is illegal that should be made legal. So who would like to start?
I vote you.
Okay, I guess I'm starting. So I chose open containers in public. Open containers referring to alcoholic beverages. So I picked this topic because I don't see harm in drinking in public. I do see harm, however, in public intoxication, which are two separate things. So currently, it is actually legal to have open containers in 9 states: Georgia, Louisiana, Missouri, Montana, Nevada, Pennsylvania. Was that 9?
Sure.
That's 6. Oh, well, in 6 states. And real quick, I'll also define public places. Any types of beaches, parks, drive-in theaters, on the sidewalk in any metropolitan area, anywhere not privately owned.
What about public schools?
Public schools.
Both universities and, I would say, like, can a teacher drink in the middle of their third grade class?
No, because that's public.
Yeah.
It's private.
A public school?
Public school's still private property.
Okay.
Owned by the state.
I also feel like that's just very unprofessional.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it definitely is, but...
and that would also, I feel like, be up to the employer, because in that case, it is no longer, like, it's not your property.
Okay. Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I just wanted to ask. Continue with your pitch.
So, basically, it is legal in some places, and in those places, while there are definitely incidences of public intoxication is still illegal. In cities like Nashville, there's a very blurred line because it is very much illegal in Nashville. However, you have things like pedal trains and those stupid driving, what do they call them?
Like the scooters?
No, the
Pedal taverns.
Pedal taverns.
Oh,
That's what
okay,
they're called.
yeah.
Yep. Those things
I hate those.
Yeah,
I hate
everyone
them
in
with a
Nashville.
burning passion.
Yeah, everyone in Nashville hates them, but
Well,
that most
time and a place.
yeah, but people are drinking out in public while they're riding those. So while it is illegal here, for some reason that is allowed.
I think the reason for that is that they're technically considering it just a moving establishment in itself. So once you're actually in the confines of the cart, I think it's a loophole, but I think that's why they're...
Yeah. But if that can be allowed, I don't necessarily understand how someone who's on their lunch break who walked across the street and went to a bar with a couple friends who then drinks 1 or 2 drinks and then walks back but didn't finish their beer, why do they have to sit there and either chug it or leave it? Why can't they just carry it with them as they walk back to work? I just don't see a big problem with it, personally. Now, obviously, public intoxication, that's a different level of things. I think it should be left up to law enforcement, as it is in those 6 places that I named previously. Public intoxication is still illegal in those places, and is the kind of determining like factors are left up to law enforcement, and whether or not they think that person is becoming a danger or is breaking any other laws, and then they can choose to take the appropriate actions.
So is there, I guess, like a recommended legal limit that you would want to say on that? Because I know, like, it is, and I think giving discretion in certain nuances and situations might be a good thing, but
No.
there should also be kind of some baseline.
No. I genuinely think it should be left up to law enforcement. If someone were to say, hey, I think that person's drunk, and they call law enforcement, or that person is seen by someone in law enforcement, and that officer takes it upon themselves to take action, great. If they look at that person and go, they're probably a little tipsy, maybe had a little too much to drink, but they're not bothering anyone, great. I do not think there should be a specific legal amount that, say the drinking limit, 0.0 whatever it is, 0.02 or whatever.
It's 0.08.
0.08 for
0.08,
driving.
cool.
Yeah.
So I don't think
0.08% blood alcohol level.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is somebody could buy a 6-pack and then just walk down the street.
Yep.
Drinking it all, right?
Yep.
Now, my other question is, are you just limiting this to beer, or is this all liquor? Because I wonder if the licenses for the restaurants would still be on the hook for some of that, some of that, as well, as far as amounts and those kind of things.
I didn't think about that. I think, if it were just me making the decision, I probably would limit it to beer. But I think realistically, it would be up to the states when they're decriminalizing it. So it would kind of be, because I don't think in the places I named, I don't think they don't all have the same laws. They have decriminalized public drinking, but they're not all the same. Like, they don't have the same stipulations. And I think that is, their stipulations are largely built upon, probably population, density, all those things, and just the culture of the city. So I think some cities and states probably would allow all liquor. I think most would probably limit it to beer, realistically.
Okay, so with beer, because there's higher gravity beers and things like that that actually have more alcohol in them than some wines,
Some liquors,
and some liqueurs as well. So is there a specific percentage of alcohol that you would? Because I know even in Georgia, I think there's gas stations, as an example of this, are only allowed to sell up to, I think it's 8%. Or Georgia, it might be higher. Tennessee is only 8%. Because if you buy a Four Loko in different parts of the borderline, then you can get one that's 8%, or you can get one that's 14.
Yeah. I think it would be a good idea to, and if you did make that limit 8 or 10%, okay, I don't have a problem with that. I don't think all states would. If you were to decriminalize it, I don't think all the states would have that stipulation in the passing of the law. But I think it would be a good idea to, and I would recommend that to any states that did decriminalize it.
What about open containers in cars?
Well, drinking and driving is still illegal, so
No, but backseat or passenger seat.
I think backseat. I understand. I probably would prefer passenger seat not be legal. It is currently, backseat is actually legal in Tennessee,
but it's not in Georgia.
But it's not in Georgia.
Dang it.
So not even sitting in a unstarted car behind the driver's wheel with a finishing off your beer from lunch before you start the car. That's okay.
I would say no, because you're now behind the driver's seat of a car. And
so then you go to the passenger side, finish your beer, and then you walk around to the driver's side.
I mean, if drinking and driving is still illegal, so at that point, I think it is legal to have finished it. But if you choose to get behind, I don't think that's that much different from going to a party and drinking it before you get in the car and then making the decision to drive. It is still illegal to drive after you've drank. So, therefore, I think, yes, technically he could sit in the passenger seat and finish that and it not be illegal, but it would be illegal as soon as he decided to drive.
Okay. Because
All right.
yeah, the way things are currently, that even if your car is off and your keys are even sitting on the hood of the car, there's still intent to drive.
Yeah.
And so that is currently illegal.
Yep. As I think it should be.
Well, because then the other thing becomes, okay, so is drinking and driving, would that be legalized as long as you remained under that 0.04%? So like you could have some driving whiskey, as long as during the time of your operating the vehicle, you remained under that limit.
I don't think it should be. I don't think that should be decriminalized. I think if you are currently operating a vehicle, I personally like the idea of if you're in the front seat of a vehicle. If you're in the back seat, I think that is a little different, and I'm okay with someone drinking a beer in the back seat of a vehicle as long as they're not operating it.
Okay.
Makes sense to me.
So would this, because this is something that are you recommending that the federal government step in and make this decision, or are you recommending that all states individually do it?
All states individually.
Because currently it is something that's left up to the states.
Correct.
So how would that affect like dry counties in the South and or even in Tennessee, you can't buy beer before noon on a Sunday.
Yeah.
Actually, I think you can now.
Well, it depends on what county you're in.
Okay.
Currently, in our county, it is illegal too. But to the county next to us, to the north and to the east, it is legal.
Okay. That might have been what I was thinking of. It was just recently legalized in Hamilton County.
Yeah, it is. I just think that it's ridiculous to have that in the first place. I think dry counties is stupid, and I just don't agree with it. So I think by having the state make the decision to decriminalize it, I think you would essentially, that state would also be saying, okay, any counties that are dry counties, that's not a thing anymore.
Well, so you can have beer in a dry county. You just can't purchase beer.
Yeah.
Or alcohol in a dry county. So even decriminal, I guess the two are separate, because you could go a county over, buy a beer, and
then open carry it in your county.
Theoretically.
Yes.
Well, just like you wouldn't want the federal government stepping on the state's rights to make that law, you wouldn't want the state government to step on the local governments to make that law as well.
Yeah, I mean that's.
I don't know. You have a good point. I definitely don't want. I mean, as it is, state governments have the right to govern, and county governments and all that. So I don't want to. I want to avoid having too much conflict there. So I think it would have to be something that is kind of accepted. Government by government.
Okay, so you would be essentially, this argument is a petition to all counties or parishes across the country.
Yes.
Rather than to the federal government or to the states.
Yeah. I mean, yes, I would like it to be decriminalized at the state level. And counties at that point, I think, would also. Most of them would. Some of them might not. I mean, technically in... there is a county... Oh, what state was it in? I looked at this earlier. There's a county in a state that it is currently illegal
Montana?
to open carry. No. But there is a specific county in that state that has laws saying that it is completely legal. So...
Well, and I think it's also because you said that you wanted to leave it up to law enforcement and how they wanted to actually enforce this. If it was decriminalized at the state level, then the counties could still...
put their own stipulations on how they enforce that.
Well, they could criminalize it and be harsher if they wanted to, which is what it currently is, kind of where, some counties are harsher on it than others.
Yeah.
But then I guess you could appeal, like if you felt like you were wrongly arrested or, in your county, you could appeal it to the state court where you would be under a different set of I don't know. The judicial system is complicated, but that's the reason that it's set up that way.
Yeah.
I don't know. So my other question is, because we're talking about open containers here on a lot of college campuses, specifically for college campuses. I think this might just be legal jargon, but your own body counts as an open container. So like for the school that I went to, it was illegal to have open containers on campus. So that meant even if you went to a house party and then walked back to your dorm, if you were
Intoxicated.
over the legal limit or had any alcohol in your blood system, then you would be considered an open container, and it would be under open carry laws. So are you changing the kind of legal jargon of that? Because that all it does is blur the line between public intoxication and open carry.
That's a very interesting way for that school to have handled that, because I would just say at that point you're not an open container, it's whether or not you're publicly intoxicated. So I would change that like legally I would open, if you have an open container, that's fine. Now a public school, even a public campus, is still private property. So right? Or am I wrong? Because
I don't believe so. I think it might be different for a university.
I'm not sure about that.
But I think public universities are protected property, but not private property.
Okay.
So they can regulate the forms of the right to assemble and those kind of things, but it's not just like the open square idea or of a public space.
Gotcha.
But that's just me.
Okay, so it's like a half measure between a public park and somebody's front yard.
Right.
Okay. So in that case, the school would then regulate what their rules are, and if their rules are, if they agree that with the state that open container is fine as long as you're not publicly intoxicated, great. That's that school's choice. If they decide no, open container on our campus is not allowed, great.
Okay.
But that's that school's decision. I think at that point it would be less of it's illegal and more of you can't attend school here if you're going to break this rule type thing. Like, I don't think you would be able to be criminally prosecuted for that. I think they would just say, hey, that's not allowed here. If you're going to do that, fine, but you can no longer attend school here type thing.
Okay. Well, so the other interesting thing about that, and this is kind of anecdotal evidence, but my specific school had its own police department. Like their entire jurisdiction was just campus.
Yeah.
But the few times that I have known people that did have issues like that, where they were technically an open container, and had run-ins with the campus police, it was not necessarily something that was enforced, and it was just more a kind of safety of like, okay, we'll make sure everybody is okay. They're not being taken advantage of or anything. Yeah. So,
which I like that. I think that's great.
Which is realistically, I think, the way that a lot of policing does end up happening.
Yeah.
But that is different everywhere you go.
Yeah.
And a whole other conversation.
Yep.
True. All right. Well, unless you guys have any more immediate questions, we should probably move on to one of y'all's choices.
All right. Well, Kyle's itching to go.
All right, Kyle. What you got?
Well, as I said for Patreon, I picked kind of a. I guess we'll stick with spicy. It's a little spicy one. I picked human euthanasia. The biggest reason I went with this, well, two big reasons. One, obviously, animal euthanasia is widely accepted as an option to end a pet's life or an animal's life. Like, the biggest thing or biggest examples I thought of was, imagine like a horse breaks its leg and the leg like cannot heal. Like, the horse cannot walk, and at that point, its quality of life just like instantly, drastically drops. So, unless there is some amazing treatment that wouldn't be overly burdensome or anything like that, like, you're like, well, we have to put it down. You know what I mean? and this also goes with like animals that have like aggressive forms of cancer, or heaven forbid, like your dog catches rabies. Like that's basically fatal. At that point, you're just like, well, we got to do the thing, So the other thing I found, which was interesting, human euthanasia is illegal in all states, but there's something referred to as assisted suicide, which is legal in 10 states. I guess 9 states in Washington, D.C. The 9 states are California, Colorado, Oregon, Vermont, New Mexico, Maine, New Jersey, Hawaii, and Washington State. Now, what the difference is assisted, what they call physician-assisted suicide. The physician or doctor gives the patient the means to end their own life, obviously with consent, and the patient then gives himself the dose. Euthanasia is where the physician actually administers the drug themselves to, like, the physician gives the drug to the patient versus, I'm sorry if I messed that up at all. Does that make sense?
Versus self-administering the
Yes.
so-called treatment.
Yes. Yeah. And the big argument here is, obviously, it's the same thing. It's like if your quality of life is just drastically dropping and you're like, man, like I really do not want to live like this. Like if you're just like, if you're, especially for comatose patients or anything like that, that's one of the big things. It's like, is the treatment trying to keep this patient alive really worth it in the end? And that's a slightly different scenario because the patient obviously is not cognizant of what's going on, but obviously the family would be able to give consent based on that. And there are actually 2 different main forms of euthanasia. The big one that people often are referring to when they say euthanasia is voluntary active. Basically, that just means it's the use of lethal medication with the patient's consent. Basically, it's just lethal injection into the arm, and then the patient's heart rate just stops and everything like that. The other one that's more we'll say secondary, is non-voluntary, is what they describe it as. And basically that's withdrawal of whatever treatment, especially if it's ineffective or burdensome. And this is the one that they use for comatose patients or anything like that, where it's not working. So it's like, cut it off, that's it, end all be all.
What is, I guess, commonly referred to as pulling the plug?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's like
being removed from life support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the big example. It's like if you're on life support, whether you're in a coma or anything like that, it's not working. Just
Okay.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I zoned out for a minute. That does qualify as euthanasia, or that doesn't?
Yes, it's a specific type.
Okay.
It's a specific type.
So taking someone off of life support if they're in a coma is illegal?
Yes. Now, obviously, the big reason, the person who that directly affects is not present of the decision. Now, obviously, there's all sorts of like power of attorney. Like, there's probably a lot of legalities that go into it because obviously then the family or immediate relation or whoever then has the power to make that decision for that person, even though the person isn't aware of the decision being made, which obviously that I feel like would be set up prior to or would be discussed if something were to happen or whatever. I mean,
yeah, well, so typically I believe that decision goes to next of kin. So it's like if it's a child, then it's the parents that make that decision. If it's somebody who's married, then it's their spouse.
Yeah.
And then, or, if they're under a conservatorship or something like that, then it's whoever has power of attorney over them.
Right.
And there are, so especially for, I think you said it was voluntary and involuntary were the 2 distinct types. Whereas
I guess non-voluntary is
non-voluntary.
There is involuntary, which that is very illegal because that's more borderline close to like
murder.
Pretty much.
Murder.
Okay.
Yeah. That's why they use the 2 different
voluntary involuntary euthanasia happens a lot. It's usually more violent.
I mean,
sometimes accidental, but it happens.
Yeah.
No. Okay. So yeah, specifically in California, I do know that voluntary euthanasia, like if the person is awake and making the decision that like I have this terminal illness and I really just I don't want my family to have to deal with the medical bills of sustaining me for much longer. There's a lot of kind of mental evaluations and things like that have to go into it. There's a whole series of counseling to say like, okay, are you sure this is what you want? Because realistically, there's no going back.
Yeah, pretty much.
So
there was a case. I think it did take place in California. It's Barber versus Superior Court, which took place in 1983. Which essentially what happened was there was a patient who, again, was comatose, and these two physicians asked this family, it's like, hey, is this something you want to do? We will withdraw his treatment if that's what you want. Like, understand there's, like you said, there's no going back, but he will not be suffering. Do you want us to do this? They agreed, and they took him off life support, and he died. And they were sued over it and everything, and it's like, no, well, we asked, like, they gave us consent to do this. We did nothing wrong. So that's the whole big thing is, like, it's just something to me that it is very, it's not a happy thing to like have happened, but if someone's just suffering and it's not like whatever is trying to, like whatever they're trying to help make it lessen is not working, you almost have to do what's right and just try and end their suffering as quickly and painlessly as possible. You know what I mean?
okay, so what kind of regulations do you think there are already that need to be kind of heightened into that, or like strengthened in order to make this case and make it something that would be viable to have across the country, as opposed to kind of what there is currently? And I mean, even the understanding of having a medical license and the whole do no harm.
Right. I feel like maybe it's more of a I feel like it's a case by case scenario right now at this point. I didn't dig a lot into what might be in place already. I feel like right now it's more of just like a case by case scenario because it's not something that happens. I don't know how often it happens or how frequently this issue comes up in everyday people's lives, everything like that. So, okay.
I almost wonder if it should be something where a new profession is created, where someone who maybe has training in psychology and in psychological matters and in trauma and stuff like that has to be the one to test the patient, and then they have to be the one to administer it, since a doctor does take an oath, saying that they will cause no harm. So if you create a new profession where it's someone else who has not taken that oath, who is medically trained but is not a doctor, someone who maybe is studied psychology and trauma, that would be someone who's legally allowed to do it.
Okay.
But it's just an idea. I don't know.
Well, so I do like the idea of having like some kind of a specialty in that. So it would be kind of like a cross between a psychoanalyst or a counselor and an anesthesiologist.
Yeah.
And then I would say probably add an additional oath on top of that in order to specialize in this.
Yeah.
Rather than, or if you're going into that field specifically, then a lot of the schooling and requirements there are still basically the same, but there is a separate board that handles. So rather than taking the Hippocratic Oath, which I believe is what it's called, you take this new one that the what?
The Hippocratic Oath.
Yeah, exactly.
The Hippocratic Oath.
Exactly.
I was thinking, Nathaniel, when you were talking about that, it would be something that maybe you could add into on hospice, which then I thought, well, then that's kind of weaponizing hospice. But so that idea is interesting. And then there's another thing. You keep talking about quality of life as far as the doctors go. And I think of what is the quality of life going to be for the family of the person who stays in a medically induced coma and then incurs all the bills. So really, if you look at it on the patient's standpoint, that's one thing. But if you take one step back and you look at a family unit, then that's where you would probably take that do no harm. You're minimizing harm at that point.
Mm-hmm.
True.
That's the thing too, is like a lot of, I don't know how expensive a lot of that stuff is, but I feel like eventually it would just be not only emotionally but financially drained. Like you said too, it's just, that's a lot of money to try and keep somebody alive.
Well, how much is your life worth? No, that legitimately is like the entire question.
I mean,
that the entire
you're right.
healthcare system is built on.
You're right.
It's getting less valuable every day.
Yeah. Well,
It's getting less that valuable the older I get. The return on investment shrinks. So
that's what we got to look forward to. Oh boy,
you should read Ikigai. But
I was wondering if I was going to be gifted that book eventually by one of you Jacksons. So
Potentially, I might expect that from my father.
yeah.
Keep an eye on your mailbox.
okay.
This is interesting. I'm reading someone's dissertation kind of while we're talking about the debate. It's literally entitled "The Good Death," and it talks about how culturally we made the shift. How euthanasia used to be considered a gift from the gods, and now it has turned into something that is like heavily debated on whether or not it's right, whether it's not. I'm curious as to when that shift happened, and are we maybe amidst a shift back?
I think it happened probably. My assumption would be when we started shifting into more secular kind of views with medicine and science, and then as medical science improved and we were able to increase, because it used to be if you got sick, if you got like pneumonia, that was fatal.
Yeah.
And in some cases now it still is. But with medical science, specifically in America and the Western world, pneumonia is something you can cure in like a week.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that we're able to handle more illnesses, and it's not as much of a mercy and a release, and that that you're going to some afterlife, I think is where society has kind of changed with that.
Yeah, I think of like Native American cultures and a lot of other non-typical of what we're used to, American culture, but it sees that this life is just one of many, or this is not the final place. And so we're just passing through instead of this is it, and then it's over.
Yeah.
And so I think that when the shift of this is it, and then it's over becomes the louder voice, then these are the kinds of things that we wrestle with.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, our whole concept of death has changed. And I mean, even as we've grown into larger societies and are not, strictly like, okay, well, the men go to war and the women keep the house. Like, as we've moved away from that kind of society as well, because it used to be, I talked a lot about kind of Norse culture and some things like that on the podcast. But, it was like you'd want to die in battle and have a valiant death and spend your afterlife in Valhalla.
Yeah.
So, if you died with a sword in your hand, that was a good death. So, yeah.
Interesting.
Another question I have is related to this. This is something that, again, just kind of like Nathaniel's, where it's up to the states. So the federal government hasn't really made a statement on this, but it's just leaving it up to the states. Is that where we're at with this?
More than likely, yes. As I said, what is known as physician-assisted suicide is already legal in certain states. Like I said, it's 9 and Washington, D.C. So I feel like it might take a long, I don't know about a long time, but it will take a lot of time. And like I said, I feel like it's probably a very case-by-case basis. in the respective states to get to the point where it would finally, I guess, be nationally recognized as like, okay, this is something we'd be willing to allow. Again, with regulations, perhaps a new profession to help properly monitor and oversee it and everything. But I think for right now, it's just a state thing. I think the federal government probably I feel like that's a matter that could be left to the states as it is right now, as we've kind of been seeing over the last 20 years when some of the more recent states to join have joined.
Well, so the other interesting argument that you could make on this is that the death penalty is currently legal. So there's people that have have been criminals or have at least been convicted of a crime who are being put to death involuntarily, whereas there's people that would like to die.
Yeah, who would rather. That's actually
that are legally not able to.
There's a is it a book or something? There's a piece of literature actually which discusses that same thing, the right to die. It's like if you don't like something, if you don't like your life for whatever reason, you should have the right to peacefully end it
under certain criteria.
Via whatever regulations, but that is a debated topic, the right to die.
If euthanasia became legal and we did that, create a profession for that, would that person then be the person to administer legally, be the new person that is supposed to administer the death penalty to criminals on convict?
I think it would, because it's the same kind of medical field. But I mean, that's a whole other argument of if the death penalty itself is ethical.
Yeah.
So,
it is. But I'm just thinking, because if that is a profession we create, and those are now the people that are most qualified to administer the death people, some people probably wouldn't want to go into that field for that reason. That might be something that is asked of them. But I don't know.
Well, I feel like you would also go into that specialty, I mean, with the understanding that you are going to be ending people's lives.
Yeah, but I think there's a difference between ending someone's life for, quality of life reasons and ending someone's life because they're on death row and it being against their will.
Well, they also, just because they're in that profession doesn't necessarily mean that they would have to deal with the death row patients.
Well, it would depend on legislation and how that profession is created. Because if it becomes something kind of like serving jury duty, where if you are asked to legally, you are required to, if that becomes something that of this profession, if you are legally required to do this, if asked, I'm just throwing theoreticals out here.
I agree that there would have to be a lot of legislation and probably cross legislation because of how
similar it is.
Yeah, how similar it is to the death penalty.
I think you would ideally, from just an understanding of it, because it is very volatile medication, and there's also been, getting into the death penalty kind of details of it, there's been a lot of discussion about what that actual experience is like as far as a way to die and whether it's humane in and of itself. So, I think it would be good to have a medical professional in that position that knows about that kind of medication and knows how to administer it in a humane way. But I do think that you still have, because this would still be considered an elected operation, right? Whether it's elected by the state or it's elected by the individual or the family.
Yes.
So I believe you can still, if it's just an elected operation, and this might be different in different states and things like that, and I'm not super well versed in the medical field, but I believe you are allowed to refuse medical attention for elected surgeries or elected operations. So, I mean, it's even by the fact that a lot of doctors now, the ivermectin. The ivermectin thing that's going on right now is, and I realize there's some lawsuits about it as well. Some doctors in a lot of other countries administer it as kind of a first round of COVID-19 treatment. But there's some patients that have been asking for that and doctors refusing to administer that. So I think it would go along kind of whatever that verdict is that if you are, as a doctor, even if you're in this position and they need somebody in your position to do the, to kill somebody on death row, then you can still say, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
And then they would find somebody else like that.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, ideally, I agree that that's how it should go.
Yeah,
but
just because you know how to swing a sword doesn't mean you have to be an
Yeah.
executioner.
Yeah. I agree. I'm just putting hypotheticals out.
Yeah, okay.
I think
If I may,
Yeah.
I don't want us to go down another rabbit hole here, but let me just throw this out. So let's say this all passes and it becomes legal. Now we know what happens when we mainstream things. You know what I'm saying? It becomes accepted, it becomes a part. I think maybe possibly a slippery slope with this would be all we've been talking about usually right now is physical disease, you got a terminal diagnosis, right? So if we start to open it up to say, hey, if you want it in your life, right, you got to meet certain criteria. I could see to where it would possibly get to, or there'd have to be a caveat as it comes to mental health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about immediately when it's passed, but you got to think 2 generations from now, if this becomes the norm and somebody's been tormented by depression for a while, all right, or schizophrenia or some of those things, and they say, I don't want to live like this, because I mean, that's, that mental health aspect can be just as tough as a physical aspect. So at what point does the government, are they allowed to step in to regulate and to plan for this contingency? You know what I'm saying? And so that may be one of the reasons why it's so slow going right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really good point.
Yeah.
So I would say that the whole point of it being a terminal illness, and the reason that that's even, like, this is kind of on the table for that, is because you have pursued everything medically that you could do to try to improve this person's quality of life and allow them to live longer. And so it has gotten to a point where they have psychological evaluations or, full on, if they're in a coma, medical evaluations, like, counseling with the families that are making these decisions and making sure that is something that needs to happen. So I do think that with the case of somebody who's dealing with a mental illness, it is, have they pursued every route of counseling, therapy, medications, whatever it is that can help them get to that point where they are no longer dealing with that. And so it is because this is a last resort. It may solve a problem, but it doesn't at all. So I think that's where kind of that, I cannot speak necessarily medically on where that line would be drawn, but I do think it would be, have you pursued every avenue, and this is the only thing left for this to even be on the table.
Yeah. I think in a lot of cases, mental health, those things come from sometimes chemical imbalances as well as just life situations you put yourself in. So in a lot of those situations, even while, doing those things like going through counseling, taking medication, all that stuff, you're still always going to be battling it. That helps you manage it. It doesn't get rid of it. So that's where I think it gets a lot more complicated, because at any situation, someone who might be managing it better because they're taking medication, who might have a good support system, but is still desperately struggling and wants to, that's where it's almost impossible to draw a line. So that's why that is a very dangerous, slippery slope.
Yeah.
It's not, because mental health isn't something you can just cure. It's something you learn to manage. So, yeah.
And I wonder what the youngest assisted suicide has been. Most of the time when we're thinking about these people, we're thinking of middle-aged or above. I'm assuming.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I
how
mean, that's where my brain was.
Yeah. So people like me is what you're saying. And so yeah. So it's just interesting that again, when you start to mainstream and put it out there and you ease the restrictions that are on it now, that opens up a lot of things that we can't necessarily foresee.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Do we want to move on
interesting. So in the Netherlands, there was a 29-year-old who was euthanized.
Cool.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
was not terminally ill, but it was she was allowed to end her life by the state on account of her psychiatric illness.
Interesting.
Do we want to move on to Josh's?
Yeah, Josh, what you got for us?
Okay.
Josh, I need to pick me up, buddy.
I mean, yeah.
Please.
Yeah.
I mean, hey, these are all very interesting topics that we could do an entire episode on.
I mean, this is true.
Yeah.
So you're gonna order a pick me up from another country right now? Is that what you're saying?
Yep, that's what I think should be able to happen. Yeah, so currently in the U.S., individuals are allowed. So companies cannot import medications and pharmaceuticals and medical equipment from outside of the U.S. It has to be produced inside the U.S. Private citizens can order up to 3 months of doses of some medications from outside the country, but no more than 3, and you still have to get like permits to be able to do that. The reason that like this is still currently the way that it is because of the FDA has, kind of stricter regulations and on quality of things that come in. And so if they're coming from outside sources, it's harder to regulate that. But realistically, like that's the answer they give. But realistically, all it's doing is allowing institutions inside the U.S. to jack up prices ridiculously high. And I mean, even getting something from Canada that has a free healthcare, the costs of, even something as simple as insulin are significantly lower. And so I just think that it is an outdated system. And, we need to figure out some way to be able to take that power away from Big Pharma and allow people to have access to medication that they need. And if that means being able to get it outside of the country to increase that competition, then I think that's one of the easiest ways to do it.
So I have a couple problems with this. I personally, if I were you, I would change, instead of importing medication, I would say we should be legally allowed to import FDA-approved medication. Because currently you can't import nearly any medication from outside the U.S., but if it was FDA approved, I think there's no reason you shouldn't be allowed to, insulin being a good example. So I like importing, being legally allowed to import any and all medication, or even if we did put some limitations on it, medication that's not FDA approved, there could be a lot of problems with that. It's easier and harder to track certain chemicals. Like in the U.S., you can't buy, there's limitations on the amount of certain drugs you can buy purely because they are used to make heroin or meth or things like that. And so being able to then import it from other countries where it's not easily tracked, and that could cause a lot of problems. So I understand, I think that should be changed to being able to import drugs that are already FDA approved.
So there are, specific drugs that are FDA approved, but it's the FDA approves like the chemical compound that goes into that medication and the
quality.
in the creation of it. Yeah. So it's also looking at the plants and making
Yes.
sure those are up to code. And
Yes.
so which I don't know that a federal organization would be able to do that for exterior sources. I think yes, like if there are drugs that are on the market that are FDA approved, then I still think private citizens should be able to. Well, then there's pseudoephedrine, like you were talking about, which is an over-the-counter medication that has now become not necessarily over-the-counter because of meth production.
Yeah.
So, but I'd say, you'd probably have just a bunch of Walter White wannabes just trying to get stuff in.
So
From,
he didn't use pseudoephedrine.
and while
yeah.
things,
Right.
you're right. The FDA is approving it based off of where it's made, how it's made, as well as the chemical compound and the chemical makeup. I don't think that would be nearly as hard to get approved as you think. Having someone from the FDA go to certain other countries that are then allowed, the problem then becomes, would the U.S. government do it? And that's probably a no. But I think finding companies who are producing these drugs, and especially in countries close to us like Canada, and getting the chemicals, all it would take is a walkthrough of the plant and getting those approvals. I don't think it wouldn't be easy, but I don't think it would be nearly as hard as you think. Yes.
I think that begins to step on sovereign nation,
which was my point of it. Yeah, because you can't have a federal organization holding.
It's
other,
kind of like
other, yeah.
kind of like California setting emission standards for their state and not allowing car sell manufacturers to sell, which effectively makes car manufacturers do that for everybody, which effectively makes California set up those emission standards. Does that make sense? So we're letting one state, because of their standards, effectively do it for everybody.
Well,
So, and I'm not saying
I think the incentive would lie in the company that is producing the drug in other countries. The incentive, we're not regulating how they do it. We're just saying, hey, if you want to sell to us, you can come to us and attempt to get permission. I don't think it's a, hey, you have to do this now. It's if you want to sell and have the ability to import your drugs into the U.S., you have to meet these standards. This is a very, very scaled example, but in the music industry, there are different requirements for mastering, different LUF meterings that you have to hit to be able to send things to Spotify, to iTunes, to YouTube, to all these different streaming platforms, Pandora. Those metering requirements are set by those streaming services, and they say, hey, if you want to do business with us, this is how you have to do it. They're not then putting that out on everyone else and saying, this is the new standard. They're saying, no, if you want to do business with us, this is our standard. You just have to decide whether or not you want to meet that standard.
Yeah, or I guess the better way to do that would be kind of with other goods when they're imported in, quality is checked, of them to make sure, like the oil that's imported, we don't necessarily go to, Saudi Arabia and look at their oil rigs, but we do check the oil when it comes in and make sure that it's kind of a certain quality, or make sure that, fruits that come in, don't have diseases on them that would affect our crops. So I think that might be the better way to do it, is kind of check those.
At that point, it's up
basically
to the FDA.
check it at the gate rather than go to the warehouse in Canada where it's being manufactured, the factory in Canada.
Yeah. Yes. It's up to the FDA and how they want to handle that, and how they want to do approvals. The thing is, you have to then convince the FDA, hey, by the way, we are now legalizing this, but only if you approve it. Therefore, you need to start approving things.
Well, and realistically, I don't think this is something that's ever going to happen, just
no.
because of the way that our government works. But I just think that it would change a lot about the healthcare system if prices of medicine were more effective. And considering the way that America loves its, capitalist view of, free market, even though it's not actually a free market competition to be able to keep prices down. That's not something that exists in our medical sphere.
Yeah.
Well, the argument there, right?
Hmm.
How much does it cost to research and develop medicine?
A lot.
When you're talking, yeah,
Yeah.
and when you're talking about multiple years of tests and trials and multiple years of academic research, and you're talking about that, then if you, if there's not going to be a return on investment, all right, the companies have no reason to innovate.
Well, and I think there should be some return on investment, but that's also, I mean,
How much is a return?
well, so, and that's what I'm saying is not necessarily regulating, not having the government say this is what the price should be, but by allowing other people into the market, you can break up the monopolies of what are there, and allow for other companies to sell and be an option and have the market bring down the price.
Well, but no other company can produce that medicine until it runs out of patent. I think the current patent is what, 9 years for a medicine before it can become generic.
Yeah, but there are plenty of medicines that are already out there that are generic or are already past that, and so you would realistically it's kind of a half measure, and it's not, in my opinion, ideal, but it would still be the pharmaceutical companies would still be able to get that and basically charge whatever they needed to be able to make back the cost of it before it became generic. But then after that 9 years, and if we're talking about something like insulin, which is not, I don't believe there's a patent on insulin. That that is something that, like, as a specific example, would be able to, and so.
So yeah, the argument against funding is, well, you have 9 years of your patent to make that money back. After that, when it goes public, guess what?
Well, then you can still make the money back,
Yeah.
but you're also working with the market.
Yeah.
But also, you got to think it's not making your money back. It's making enough money to continue to further research into something else. So you not only have to make the money back, but you have to make enough to where now we're going to move in this direction.
Yeah.
Granted, that's just a shade of difference, but
Yeah.
it's
No,
not
it
like
is,
we.
but that
Yeah,
is
yeah.
a significant difference when you're talking
Financially, yeah.
about. Yeah, it's might be a slight difference, but it's also millions of dollars. Yeah, I mean, and I think there are. I'm not entirely sure how to exactly do this. Whether it would be making sure that the product's coming in, checking it at the gate, making sure that the products are coming in. If it's, maybe it's hospitals that are only able to, or, hospitals or pharmacies that are able to get that medication. So it's not the individual that, you can't go out and kind of make your own deal. But
How is this? Remind me again. How is this different from the individual can get 3 months of a medicine from a Canadian pharmacy?
so the way that it would be different is that, so even though, like, I don't go to the pharmaceutical company to buy the medicine, I go to the pharmacy to buy the medicine that they got from the manufacturer. And so this just says that other manufacturers can exist as well to bring the prices down that the pharmacy has to pay, therefore bringing the prices down that I have to pay. So,
Okay.
yeah, and you would be able to get, depending on what the medication is, if you needed to get more at that time. Right now it is, you have to get, I believe it's state approval to be able to get that 3-month supply from an outside source. So it's already like a complicated system of how to do that, and then you are still at the risk of, okay, well, this isn't like the quality of it isn't necessarily like I don't know what the quality of it is.
Right.
Which is the reason that that's part of the reason that a lot of people just go within whatever systems that they currently have.
Who?
Yep.
This is interesting. I kind of want to read more about just in general laws on how you get those permits to be able to import up to 3 months. Looking at the FDA's website, it says that a drug can be refused entry if it appears to be adulterated, misbranded, or unapproved. But those are the only 3 examples it gives. Okay. Well, now I have a new topic I'm going to be researching the next couple days.
I assume unadulterated means like tampered with or anything like that.
Yeah, if the seal is broken.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
Just a way for them to ensure what is on the label is what's in the bottle.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah. Which makes sense.
Yeah.
Which might actually be closer to kind of what I'm talking about.
Yeah. But it's interesting because the way this is wording, and comes directly from the FDA's website, the way that this seems to be worded is that it is legal unless it falls under one of those categories. And then it lists a couple more examples, but that could just be this one singular page out of the probably 15 to 20 pages it has on the website. So
I was about to say there's probably a lot to read
Yeah,
and actually digest.
Yep.
Well, and then different states probably have different. Because I mean, like you can't bring fruit into California,
yeah.
so
Yeah.
it-
So we
what?
can move on because there's a lot here.
it's in order to protect their crops from parasites and things like that. It's weird. You just can't cross the border with fruit.
Okay.
That's what I mean. Like different states have different.
Is
kind
that
of importing-
unpasteurized fruit or any fruit?
I believe it's unpasteurized. I'm not sure,
Interesting.
but
We'll
I
never know.
All right, Tim, what is your answer to this
I
topic?
haven't driven to California in a while.
All right. So this is slightly different than what you guys have. It's kind of I think low stakes, but it's interesting anyway. It is illegal to buy and sell Cuban cigars in the U.S. So I think that should change. This started back in 1962, by the way, 1962. So we're coming up on the 60th anniversary of when JFK started the embargo against Cuba. All Cuban imports, including tobacco. So it's the longest running embargo in the history of, I'm assuming, the world, but definitely the country, the U.S., that we've had against another country. And I think it's about time to kind of relax it a little bit. I mean, what have the Cubans learned in this amount of time?
So, and the reason that it was made illegal was that because they were a communist state.
Yes, because they were a communist state. That was right around the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the Bay of Pigs, and those kind of things.
Okay.
In 2014, I think what most people remember in 2014 that Obama announced a relaxation of the trade embargo, so that opened up the educational travel to Cuba and those kind of things. And as part of that, travelers were allowed to bring up to $100 worth of Cuban cigars back for personal consumption, but it was still and has always been illegal to buy and sell Cuban cigars. In 2016, there's a partial lift on the trade embargo that starts to relax that a little bit. It lifted the $100 limit of Cuban cigars and basically said personal consumption or to give to friends, but buying and selling was still illegal. And then in 2020, Trump took a stronger stance and just went back to prohibiting any Cuban imports, including tobacco. According to a 2018 UN report, the embargo has cost the Cuban people $130 billion in its ever since it's been there. So I just think it should be lifted. The U.S. is allowed to give humanitarian aid to Cuba. And so, it's not like we're ignoring them. So what's the
Why is it
I
still
don't,
there, kind of thing?
why is it still there? We still have diplomatic relations with and trade relations with China, which is a communist country. We have diplomatic relations with Russia, and there's only 4 countries we don't have any diplomatic relations with in the world. So I don't understand why we're picking on poor little Cuba sitting 90 miles away.
I wonder how many Cuban cigars Donald Trump has smoked.
At least one. At least one.
Not saying anything, just saying something small.
Well,
So,
so yeah, this is more of a political issue, and I think a state or countrywide theory or stance issue more than what some of our other discussions have been.
Yeah.
So it may be even more difficult to tie down or argue one way or the other.
okay. So, and is yours on the embargo overall, or is it specifically on the tobacco?
Well, it started specifically on tobacco, but I mean, I can see, the other big one was rum, and then just the other goods, and those kind of things. The thing is, obviously, I guess the argument is since the state owns everything as being a communist country, when we start to do trading with them, we are supporting that government, and so since we don't want to do that.
Yeah.
We're just not going to buy anything.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I think that much like sending ping pong players to China in the 1970s, I think if we started to open the door a little bit, you could see, I think you might be able to see some benefits. And so it'd be more of a symbolic kind of thing. Obviously, you would have to regulate it. You could, because, there's a lot of cigar manufacturers here in Florida and Tampa as well. There's a huge Cuban population that hates the Cuban government in Florida, so it's a tricky issue. But I think that if you start to open the door little by little, and everybody talks about a Cuban cigar being the finest in the world, so maybe this would be a symbolic type of gesture. You could regulate it one way or another, try to make sure that the money that is spent on them goes to the manufacturers themselves and not necessarily to the pockets of the president. I just think it'd be a good gesture for someone in our hemisphere.
okay. Yeah, because I think realistically, the other argument there why, like the comparing them to China, which is also a communist state, is that I think China is a much bigger player in the world market. And so realistically, I don't know exactly what list of products we get from China, but I feel like it's quite large. And so I don't necessarily, yeah, it would definitely hinder our ability to kind of exist in that world economy.
I think each of us, if we reached out right now and touched an object that was closest to us, it has probably been to China.
Yeah, these mics we're recording this on were made in China.
Yep.
I don't think they were.
It says made in China.
Is it really?
Are we? Hold on. Where?
It doesn't on mine.
It would be on the front of yours, Nathaniel.
It's not on mine. Mine's also
Scouring.
nicer than you guys's.
Okay,
so.
well, Nathaniel
I
has
think
a
he's
different mic than us.
Yeah.
The
Nate,
other
I
3
do.
microphones that we have that we're using are made in China. So
yeah, Nate has the good one.
yes, but whereas we can kind of get away, and I guess we have at this point gotten away with not trading with Cuba.
Yeah. But if we're gonna make exceptions for China, it's kind of hypocritical of us not to make exceptions to other countries. Like I don't know. I don't see a point. It sounds like and looks like, Obama was starting to kind of loosen up some of these things as kind of good conscious, like, hey, let's work together here.
as a gesture.
Yeah. But
Yeah, and that was right around time, Fidel died, and then his brother was there, and I think his brother took a little bit of a softer stance as well, and so there was some sort of meeting. But they have a new president now. I think he might be a little more hard line, which may have been why Trump went back. And
Yeah.
also, I think that was during the time where remember they were saying about the embassy workers in Cuba. They were getting this mysterious illness, and they thought it was some sort of electromagnetic.
I have not heard of that.
What?
So
Oh, you haven't?
No.
Okay, maybe I was wearing aluminum foil on my forehead when I heard it, but I don't think that I no. I think it's a legit thing. It was some sort of, I don't know, some sort of thing that they claim or they blame the Cuban government of intentionally doing something in the U.S. embassy that would cause it was like they were feeling nauseous.
Yeah,
And
hearing sudden loud noises, pain in one or both ears, feeling pressure or vibrations in their head, tetanitis, visual problems, vertigo, nausea, congestive difficulties, fatigue, and dizziness.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, causes not definitively determined. According to the first thing that popped up on Google when I typed in disease at the Cuban embassy.
Yeah. So I think it wasn't I don't think it was like a germy weapon, whatever that's called, but it was some sort of
yeah, not
using,
a chemical weapon, but
The
yeah.
bubonic plague.
That's interesting.
It was referred to as the Havana Syndrome.
yeah. So that might have been what caused it to go back to full on. But
This is interesting.
Well, so that was also in the kind of later half of 2020, where I think President Trump was, shutting down kind of a lot of things.
yeah. In September.
because of the COVID.
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah, I think there were probably a lot of things that we probably don't necessarily understand or have knowledge about. But
Well, I mean, to be fair, this is just about like cigars. Like realistically, like
It's not though. It's political. It has nothing to do with the cigars themselves. Has everything to do with our
that's fair.
relationship with the country of Cuba.
And our standing in the world as far as the arbiter of whatever democracy is, I would think.
Yeah.
yeah,
And
that's
so
fair.
it depends on your philosophy on that, your philosophy on who's your neighbor, those kind of things. So again, it's not it sounds simple on the one hand, and I'm sure there's a nice black market for it on the other
Yeah.
that's operating right now.
True.
However, I think because I think I looked it up. You guys probably have already by now, but it's like it's $50,000 fines. So it's mainly fines. I think there was a case in 1997 where there was a big bust for Cuban cigars, and so overall, I think it's not necessarily one of the biggest concerns of the American government, but again, as a symbolic gesture, I think that it I don't know if that would do anything as far as diplomatic relations go, but it may be just as a symbolic gesture, a move in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't see how it would hurt if you legalize cigars and are able to, show them the profits they could get. Maybe eventually open up to other imports like rum and things like that, and see where our relationship, country to country, is after that. It might help things a lot. It might make things worse, and then we make it illegal again.
yeah, take
You
cigars as kind of a first step.
At least
Yeah.
we'll have learned something.
We're not
Yeah.
committing to a full-on relationship, but we'll go on a date.
Funny enough, I think out of all four of these, this might be the hardest just because it does involve two separate governments that are definitely at odds.
But if it works out, imagine the rewards. Like imagine
Yeah.
what potentially could be.
Well, and so then the other question is, are we still actually directly at odds with, Cuba and with communism?
Yeah.
Because
I mean, none of us are politicians, so none of us really know what our relationship with them as a country is. It's also one of those things where, I don't really know outside of the pleasure of being able to enjoy a Cuban cigar what benefit it would have on the U.S. It would benefit Cuba a lot. but Cuba's a small country. Us sending stuff there, exporting stuff to Cuba won't benefit the American economy like importing Cuban cigars would for the Cuban economy.
And we already, we already export, humanitarian aid.
Yeah, true.
So we're already doing stuff. Maybe we just trade cigars for humanitarian aid.
I like it. That's a good compromise
that's
right
smart.
there.
That's pretty smart. That's big brain.
So how many bandages does it take to get a humidor?
How much Neosporin?
Wow.
Oh, man.
All right. Well, let's go around real quick. We'll reward points. So, Tim, just so you know, rewarding points, they don't have to have necessarily completely changed your mind. If they made a good point that made you think and go, maybe that's kind of interesting. I like that. That could be really good. Then you're free to reward them a point. If no one made any points that you like and you just decide, yeah, I think my decision was the best and I never second guessed it, then you can abstain from rewarding any points. So we'll go ahead and start with one of the hosts. Josh or Kyle, who wants to go first?
Tradition, baby. You got it.
Oh, goodness. Always on the spot. There were a lot of really good points made between all of us. I know his might be pretty hard to make happen, but like I said, because of the potential of what could grow from it, I'm going to go with Tim's.
All right.
I want to see it happen. I want to see it happen.
I mean, you just want a Cuban cigar.
No.
All right, Tim, do you want to go?
I can. Although I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to. Everybody made good points. I think that I would award. Can I award half points?
No. It's got to be it's got to be one full point.
Yeah.
One full point.
One full point. Okay. I think that Josh had some interesting arguments. I'm not totally convinced of everything, but I think of the three, he made me think the most. The other two, because it comes down to states' decision or states' rights or county rights, that there seems to be there's avenues for this to be happening already, and so it's not that it's necessarily totally illegal. You know
Fair
what I'm saying?
enough. Yeah, fair enough.
I get it.
So,
All right. I am going to give my point to Kyle. I think it's something that I definitely understand, and I think there would need to be a lot further kind of deep dive into it, and looking at kind of the psychology of everything, and really being able to define quality of life and set those parameters. But I think, especially with kind of where our medical system is at right now, I think it wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing to take a look at.
That leaves you, Nathaniel.
I'm a little stuck. I'm going between Josh and Kyle. Both of them just made me I'm very interested and actually want to do research in both a lot more. So really, it just comes down to who made the better argument. So I'm gonna give my point to Tim.
Dang.
That makes sense.
Yeah, no,
Plot
genuinely, I am actually kind of interested. I think Tim's is probably the most unrealistic, like I said, just because it is two separate governments and actually two governments that have a very, very long history of not getting along. And, but I do think it is something that is almost pointless from our perspective, and actually kind of hypocritical as a nation to agree to do, business with China and not Cuba. And I do think actually having a good connection with a close neighboring country can only do us as a country good. So, yeah, I'm gonna give my point to Tim.
Congratulations, Tim. You got 2 points.
And I got none. Hot diggity dog. So, hey, Kyle, you want to go ahead and run down points so far for the month?
Yes. So as of right now, at the end of this episode, Josh is still in the lead with now 11 points. I am tied with you. We have 6 points each. And actually, there's a 3-way tie. For the guests now also have 6 points.
All right. And is this the last week?
This is the last
This
week.
is the last week.
Interesting.
Gosh dang it.
So this will determine who gets
Why am
the
I always
the
tied
punishment.
with Kyle? I was tied with Kyle last month going into the last 2 episodes.
I know.
God.
Well,
All right. Well,
you have 2 episodes left to take a lead and not lose.
Yeah.
Can
All
he
right.
do it?
Probably not. All right. Well, we will see you guys on Wednesday for our BS episode.
Bye-bye.
Well, that's it for today's episode. Be sure to join us on the next episode where we will continue to debate as good friends do. Follow us on Instagram and YouTube and stay up to date on all things asshat, and to participate in polls and activities throughout the week based on the themes of the upcoming episodes.
We also started a Patreon for those of you who are interested in showing your support in a more direct way. On our Patreon, we have a ton of bonus content, including tier lists, loser dinners, and bonus podcast episodes.
We want to continue making content that makes you think, smile, and especially laugh. And the best way that you guys can help us do that, leave a like or a comment, download and share all these episodes with your friends and family members who you think would enjoy our tomfoolery, our shenanigans, and all those other crazy words that encapsulate our content.